Today's tutorial requires no baking for this quick Timon and Pumbaa themed bug log. This is a bit of a rushed cake. I had only 4 hours to turn this Aldi Swiss roll into a birthday cake for my husband Adam. Swiss roll is one of his favourites, and he said he didn't want a cake for his birthday, just because he knows how much of a mess I make when I'm baking. So I decided to turn this squashed Swiss roll into something a little bit more special before he got home from work. Please ignore my hands throughout this tutorial. I previously just made a cake with lots of food colouring. So you can see it's not exactly round, it's a bit on the flat side, so I'm just going to plump it up with my hands and I'm coating the whole thing in a layer of chocolate ganache. This ganache was just made, so it is a little bit runny, and I didn't have much time to leave it to set either, so I'm just going ahead and whacking on 2 browny yellow circles for each end of the log and scoring in some lines with the Dresden tool. I'm then draping over some brown sugar paste, tucking it underneath, and when trimming the ends off, I'm leaving a little bit of an overhang. Then you want to score the whole thing to add texture, and then pull to manipulate some of those edges into broken bark. Once you're happy with that, take a small cone of brown paste and merge it on the top for a little hollow branch. Push your tool down inside it to open up a hole. I'm now covering around the log with some green paste, which you will see I've cut a soft rectangle shape from the centre. I'm just pushing the edges underneath the log to get it to fit snugly and cutting and smoothing the join. This is very similar to the toilet seat method, always linked in the description box, but instead of cutting a circle, I just cut a rectangle. I'm then adding some texture to the board, and it can take a little while, so if you have a similar texture mat, you could just use that instead. I'm now adding a little definition to the edges of the board and adding shadow where the log is sitting in a green airbrush colour. I've then swapped over to brown to do the ends of the log and down the bark. Don't worry if you get overspray on the edges, just dampen your brush and allow the colour to get into the deep lines. It just adds to the mossy jungle effect. Using some leftover green, I'm attaching random pieces to the log and texturing it with a star piping tip. For Pumbaa, I started with a ball and flattened the top. I'm just sitting him at the base of the log and covering his belly with a little circle of dark brown paste. His legs start as a sausage, with one end rolled right down thinly and squash the remaining circle end flat. I'm then bending the little string on itself and bending the end over and trimming it for his hoof. Without trimming all the way through, I'm just marking the start of his hoof with my scalpel. Stick this onto the side of his body so he's in a sitting position. Do the same for the other side. His arms are very similar, but with a much smaller ball at one end. I'm attaching this so his little hoof is holding his bug-filled belly. His other one is just resting down on the board. From the same colour, roll a little string for his tail. His head, I'm just placing it on now, and it's a slightly squashed oval, and we're going to build him up from here. Mark him where his mouth is going to go with the Dresden tool, and then start deepening it and pulling it out with the larger end. To this, add a tiny little rectangle of white for his tooth. Taking the large ball tool, mark him where his eyes are going to go, and also push down behind them so that they stand out a little. Then with the smaller end, mark inside of these. In the same colour, I'm squashing on a little soft triangle for his snout and I'm trying to blend it towards his eyes and cheeks. I'm then digging my tool in to create larger holes for his tusks to fit, before gently closing his mouth a little. His tusks are very pale yellow cones which you just want to place in those holes and slowly bend upwards with a slight 90-degree angle. The end of his nose is pale pink squashed into a very soft triangle which we're just going to push and blend to size. I'm then just marking in the placement of the nostrils before making them deeper and bigger. This is an added extra step, but I'm just rolling a very small piece of the body colour and placing them over the tusks for his overlapped lip. His eyes are pale yellow balls inserted into the holes and then they're emphasised across the top with thin lines of black paint. Whilst we have the paint out, I'm also going to do the trotters. Now insert small black dots for pupils and squash them to size before finishing them off with tiny white balls for catch lights. His ears are squashed tapered sausages and I'm squashing a small sausage of pink inside it. Poke holes in the top of his head and insert one of the pointy ends in, pushing it down and bending his ear into shape. Finally, put some small black spikes on the top of his head and down his back for his hair, and also a cone on the end of his tail with a few spikes pulled out. Before adding Timon, I'm just going to colour the moss on the log so it doesn't get any overspray. I'm holding him into position with a cocktail stick. I am now in full-on rush mode, trying to get this finished, and Timon isn't as perfect as I would have liked, so I'm just going to let you watch the process I went through rather than trying to explain it all. But you'll see his body and legs are made all in one, and then his toes are added in separately with the dark brown. I also placed a small piece of wire at the top of the neck to hold his head, as it's less intrusive than the thicker cocktail stick. Other pieces, such as arms, are just tiny sausages with the balls of brown for hands, and don't forget his tail at the back too. I faff around a lot making his face, as the time restriction just wasn't on my side and I wasn't fully happy with how he was looking, so I'm just going to let you watch and see how his face was built up. Finally are the finishing details. This was a splodge of brown paste which I'm just smoothing the ends out with the palm of my hand. And then taking some white dust just mixed with water and painting on the quotes from the film, which I thought was quite fitting as his Swiss roll is cream filled. I'm then adding some little grubs and bugs. My favourite is this little orange one. Scored and pushed back together, it was like a little croissant. The legs were just pulled out with the Dresden tool once it was on the board. Other bugs are just soft diamond or ball shapes stuck together and all scored down the back. Black paint finishes them off, and you can either use spots or stripes to give them variation. My favourite bit at the end is adding all the rest of the details, such as grass. These are just spikes of paste grouped together and pinched off at the base to stick them around the log. Leaves are squash pieces of paste with the Dresden tool pulled harshly outwards to create the spikes. Add these all around the board, including some extra mud splats to make the board look less empty. And we're done! I literally made this in just under 4 hours and had 10 minutes to spare to quickly tidy up and hide the cake. I was cutting it very fine, so apologies if the tutorial isn't as thorough as usual, but hopefully you will still pick something up from it. I'm a huge fan of these no-bake cakes as it cuts down the creation time and it's a little less messy too. Hope you enjoyed this one. The Swiss roll was gone in only 5 large servings, but it was well enjoyed. Please consider subscribing to see what I get up to next week. Thanks guys.